Hi, everybody. Reading once again from my book, Transforming Suffering into Wisdom. We've gone through the first two of the three intentions that encompass much of the book, certainly much of the flavor of the book, and the meditative practice of the book. The first intention was to live in the present moment. The second intention was to pull the plug on the self. And the third intention arises out of those first two. The first two are essential to make the third one possible. The third one is very much a message for our own time. And for all times of trouble. The intention is to be fearless and forgiving in the midst of suffering. We're going to unpack this intention over a number of readings. The first few readings are just quotes from other books. The first quote I'm going to talk about a little bit. The first quote is, so you can see the intention number 3, be fearless and forgiving in the midst of suffering. The first quote is from William Blake. It goes like this. It's very simple, but there's much behind it. In heaven, the only art of living is forgetting and forgiving. In heaven, the only art of living is forgetting and forgiving. Most of us know William Blake, if we know him at all. We know the name, perhaps. We've heard some of his sayings. He made many an aphorism that are profound, challenging. He wrote aphorisms on the Book of Job and did incredible illustrations. He was one of these amazing figures who both was brilliant as a poet and also did amazing paintings as well, and ink washes and engravings. And so here's just an example. This is called The Lamb. And most of us, if we're familiar with his poetry, are familiar with poetry like this. The lamb, little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Gave thee life and bid thee feed. By the stream and o'er the mead, gave thee clothing of delight. Safest, softest, woolly. Whoops, sorry, that one over again. Softest clothing, woolly, bright. Gave thee such a tender voice, making all the vales rejoice. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? If we know his work at all, we know that simplicity of almost nursery rhyme-like poetry, often deceptively simple. One of my favorites is Tiger, Tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, which has a lot of punch and power to it. What most of us don't realize is that he wrote a number of extraordinary, challenging, epic poems that are almost impossible to read, even for a scholar of Blake to really understand. He was considered a poet's poet, so read almost only by poets. You'll see one of his books behind me, and I'm going to pull that book forward because that's the book that the quote comes from. And the quote, by the way, it may stir up memories. You may think that it has references from the Bible. I haven't found anything in the Bible, but one of the things that you'll find, or at least not precisely that in the Bible, but you'll find King Lear in Shakespeare talking in the same line about forgiving and forgetting, talking about how he's an old man, and just realizing that that's what's necessary. This is the most incredible book he wrote, and as I said, almost unreadable for most people. It's called Jerusalem. It's not the Jerusalem that some of us have heard, and certainly in England, we've heard it many times, the Jerusalem that is sung at all the football or soccer matches and almost every major event. It's the unofficial anthem of England. And it's a beautiful, beautiful song and poem. But this is an epic poem. That poem, Jerusalem, he actually put in another one of his epics, an epic called Milton. In this poem, Jerusalem was the last of his major pieces of work. And it is also an illuminated manuscript, but with much literature, much poetry written in long lines, and many illustrations to it as well. Very difficult to read and to understand, to interpret, but hugely what you feel as you come to it. I've read it just probably 5 or 6 times, and even I still struggle with many aspects of it, because there are many quotations from the Bible and allusions to places and events in England that I'm not familiar with, but particularly to the Bible and the mythology that was interpreted at the time. This particular couplet about forgiveness and forgetting and the art of living in heaven appears in a very strange picture, and it looks rather classic and beautiful in a way, of women. But it turns out that as beautiful as the image might be, or you might think it to be, it's quite problematic. The women in the picture are confused, are dark, are deceptive. And in particular, the woman from whom we're getting this quote, right here, a woman named Gwendolyn, you'll see that she's crossed her legs, which is interpreted by many people as blocking kind of natural sexuality. And you'll see she's hiding. Her left hand is behind her back. She's hiding something, and that's spoken to in the text. And then what's most extraordinary, it happens only 3 or 4 times in this poem, is that there's a passage that's written in mirror language, so to speak. And that's where the poem comes out about forgiveness and forgetting. She's said to hide a falsehood behind her. And the falsehood starts off with this, maybe I should read this to you. The falsehood starts off with this, in heaven, the only art of living is forgetting and forgiving. But it has 3 more lines, especially in the female. But if you on earth forgive, you shall not find where to live. It's a dark message, and one that I think Blake would be fiercely opposed to. He builds in his work toward forgiveness, and this plate is plate 81 out of 100 plates, and the theme of forgiveness builds and builds and builds, and it's a fiery theme. It's a theme that would resonate very beautifully with the title of my book, Transforming Suffering into Wisdom. And once again, the poem that we read, the 2 lines that we read here are, in heaven, the only art of living is forgetting and forgiving. And I think one other thing to be aware of, Blake, almost his whole life was lived in a time of a tyrant king, King George III, although he became more and more of a tyrant the older that he got. You might recall The Madness of King George. It was a movie made about his last years, and he was quite mad. And nowadays, in this time of coronavirus, not only do we feel the kind of the darkness all around us that Blake felt very much coming out of the Industrial Revolution, and the extreme social upheaval, the poverty, the pollution that was arising out of that, but also the madness of leadership in a country that was growing in its entrepreneurial movements and in its theme of democracy. I mean, very much we're a child of England. So in my work here, Transforming Suffering into Wisdom, the notion of forgetting, we have as the theme that we use for it is, or the way that we talk about it is a kind of a mantra, which is to let your thoughts go. So that's forgetting. But let your feelings be. And it's in that being with the feelings that we feel and model and practice forgiveness.